3 ways that Spider-Verse broke the rules for 3D animation. First and foremost, you have to know the rules of animation in order to break them. Traditionally, 3D animation is animated on ones, which means you have a new pose every 1 frame. For animation on ones, this gives a really photorealistic and natural look for the character's movements. In the first Spider-Verse movie, they utilize a technique called animating on 2s, which is a very popular technique from the 2D hand-drawn animation world. In this technique, you have 1 pose every 2 frames. So this is where it gets really cool. Across the Spider-Verse introduces a character called Spider-Punk, who is a nonconformist anarchist character. The genius technique that they use is they're not animating the characters on 1s nor 2s, because that would conform to all the other characters in the movie. So instead, they're animating Spider-Punk on 3s, which means 1 pose every 3 frames. In fact, they had a whole list of rules for how they were supposed to animate Spider-Punk, including animating the guitar on 4s, animating the jacket on 3s but offset 1 frame, but at the same time, knowing that they could break these rules at any point, because it all leads back to the character being a nonconformist. Before these movies, you'd have a hard time finding animated movies that have inconsistent frame rates between the characters. If you think that's cool, I think you're gonna love these next 2 rules that Spider-Verse breaks, because ultimately, I think these are the ones that are gonna change 3D animation forever. One of the core concepts of animation is called Inbetweens. When you animate a character, a popular workflow is to pose out your character in their key poses first. This is where the term keyframes come from. The next step is to add additional frames that will guide the movement of the character's animation. These are usually called breakdowns. Finally, the brunt of the work is usually in the poses that are between the keyframes and the breakdowns, Inbetweens. In fact, a lot of traditional Disney animators only animated the keyframes and the breakdowns, and there would be an entire department separate for animating all of the in-betweens. Now that we have 3D animation, the in-betweens come a lot quicker because the computer is able to interpret this information for you. All of this is important because when it comes to pushing the medium of animation into a new direction, as Pierre, the director of The Bad Guys, puts it, the animators have to fight the computer in order to get the movements and animation styles that they're looking for. This leads us to the second rule of animation that Spider-Verse breaks, which is choosing not to have in-between frames. We did this all the time when I worked on The Bad Guys. I would love to make a video talking about my time working on The Bad Guys, so if that's something that interests you, please leave a comment and tell me to do it. But let's get back to in-betweens. So how do in-betweens work in practice? If you have a character throwing a punch, usually you'll start with a pose where the character is winding back, a pose where the character is throwing the punch in midair, followed by a pose where the punch lands. These are usually 3 different frames. With Spider-Verse, the animators can choose not to have in-between frames, so you go directly from the anticipation pose right into the impact pose. This creates a harder impact on the punch, and you really feel when the character gets hit. To help the audience feel this impact without actually animating the in-between frames, the animators utilize a technique called smear frames. These are usually additional drawings or limbs on top of existing poses that help the viewer lead their eye from one pose to the next without actually animating the in-between frame. Now, this is not a new technique that they invented. This is a technique that's been around in hand-drawn and 2D animation for quite some time. Rarely was this technique ever used in 3D because for the longest time, photorealism was the preferred animation style. This leads us to the third rule that Spider-Verse broke for 3D animation, and I think this is the most important one: perfectionism. Because of the nature of animated movies, everything that you see on screen is intentional and created by a team of artists to look a certain way. In previous 3D animated films, the movements of the characters, texturing, surfacing, environments, all of this was modeled after how things look, feel, and move in the real world. Around the time that Spider-Verse came out, you were starting to see the photorealism trend reach its peak. Quite frankly, it became very easy for us to make things as they appear in real life. The Spider-Verse movies take inspiration from the original source of the story, the comic books. Now, while this is not a new piece of information, I think it is important to understand that at the time, no one was taking inspiration from anything other than real-world physics and movements, except really the Lego movie. Please tell me to make a video about the Lego movie. I will talk about it forever. The Lego movie walked so that Spider-Verse could fly. To break the rules of perfectionism, the team intentionally created mistakes for the sake of stylization. Little details like the outline of Miles Morales' eyes not lining up with the coloration to mimic how they would be printed in a magazine or comic book. The animators know that this is technically not correct, but they're doing so anyway in order to fight perfectionism. While this might seem simpler to do, this is actually a lot harder, especially when you're making a movie that's designed by teams. Trust me when I say there were probably 6 meetings talking about only the outline in Miles Morales' eye. Animation as a medium is at a point in history where you're about to see a major revolution. The power of stylization and committing to an art style is the first step in this transformation. I'm looking forward to seeing how animation evolves, not only for cinema, but also for new mediums like virtual reality. In fact, I'm producing my own 3D animation for virtual reality because I want to see the medium continue to evolve and push the boundaries of storytelling. If animation in virtual reality is something that interests you, you should definitely check out the launch video for this project here. I'm going to be documenting the entire process here on my YouTube channel from the initial script development to the final product. In the meantime, if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. It really helps me out a lot, and I appreciate all of you who have followed me in the last couple of weeks. Until next time, thanks for watching.